Greetings and welcome. We are in 303 Senior English A, and our project now is to continue with our study of the Sonnets of Shakespeare. I want to pause for a moment and make a real quick level 1 observation of some notes that you're going to take on page 277. Please read with me about the mystery of the sonnets, and I would write this down. We are actually working with Sonnet 130 on page 278. We will get to the annotation in a moment, but first we want to pause on page 277 of your hymnals, and we just want to read about the mystery of the sonnets. Let's read together. For centuries, readers have puzzled over Shakespeare's sonnet sequence, which tells a story of love and betrayal. The early poems address a beautiful young man whom the poet urges to get married and have children. The latter poems concern a dark-haired woman who torments the poet with jealousy. Midway through the sequence, a rival poet makes an appearance, further complicating the situation. Were these characters real people? Or were they simply creations of Shakespeare's dramatic imagination? Literary detectives have proposed various historical figures as the characters in the sonnets. But the only facts we know for sure are that the sonnet sequence was published in, let's write it down, 1609 and dedicated to a Mr. W.H. Beyond this, we really don't know much about what's going on with this sonnet sequence. Of course, the connect to literature question is a fascinating one, especially given Sonnet 130, the famous "My Mistress' Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun" that we're about to look at. Question: does knowing the story told by the sonnets make reading individual sonnets more interesting? Why or why not? And then what you're going to have, and I won't go through it with you in detail, but you can take a look at the images, and I hope you're doing it, on page 277. You have different kinds of people. They're going to provide for you images of those people who could either be the dark-haired woman mentioned briefly, the rival poet, and of course the young, stunningly handsome young man that Shakespeare is purported to maybe be writing these sonnets to in his argument that he should find a beautiful woman, settle down, and have children. Having said all of that, let's now turn to page 278 and Sonnet 130, one of the really famous sonnets in the sequence of 154 sonnets, because it's difficult sometimes to know exactly how to interpret this poem. Well, let's just read the poem to begin with, and then let's come back and exegete. Again, let me remind you our focus. Our focus is to try to improve our reading. So actually read along with me. Don't just let me read it for you. Don't just let me help you to be able to interpret this. Try and see how much of this work you can do on your own as seniors, and obviously preparing for the university college experience to follow. Sonnet 130. Read it with me. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I've seen roses damasks red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet by heaven I think my love is rare, as any she belied, with faults compare. Now, the challenge of this poem is to understand if he is insulting a woman or he's complimenting the woman. But before we get there, let's work at level 1 and just exegete, shall we? Notice the opening lines. Let's begin, though, with a brief observation. This is going to be a poem about a woman's beauty or the lack thereof. Her physical attractiveness, that is to say, her physical appearance, right? And then, of course, the idea of whether, in fact, this individual is actually being complimented or criticized. Let's go to work with it. Notice, first of all, my mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. So let's just write it down. This is a famous first line of this poem. That is to say, he says about his girl, she does not have eyes that are beautiful or bright as the sun. Let's write it down as bright as the sun. That would be the first thing we would say. My mistress' eyes are not bright as the sun, right? Notice the next body part that will be emphasized has to do with her lips. Notice coral is far more red than her lips red. So in other words, already we've jacked on two body parts. He says, hey, the girl I'm into, she does not have drop-dead gorgeous eyes like the sun. They're not bright like the sun. My girl's eyes are not like the sun, and her lips are not the color of coral. That is to say, she doesn't have beautiful red lips. Let's look at the next one. If snow be white, why then her breasts are done. Now, wait a minute. There's two things here you want in your notes at level 1. First of all, the notion of physical beauty by women of 1600 was the whiter they were, the paler they were, the more beautiful they were considered. So much so that as Queen Elizabeth actually starts to get older and her skin starts to turn more yellow, she took white eggshell, and pasted it to her face to make her skin look more white. Okay? Now, of course, the problem with this is, A, how do you stick it on a person's face? And B, once she moves her face in any way, like smiling or talking, then obviously it's going to crack, which is why Elizabeth often, when she got quite old, would never smile and only talk like this so she didn't move much of her face. And if you've seen paintings of that era, you'll actually see these hairlines, kind of lines. It's from the eggshell cracking. Of course, it was Queen Elizabeth. So it wasn't like you were able to, for example, go, whoa, babe, that's just a butt ugly look, because she'd chop your head off, right? She was the Queen of England, the monarch of the realm. And so you basically had to put up with it. But beauty was considered in its time, the paler the skin, the better. Notice here that is it an insult? He says it. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dung, that is to say, not white. So already we've got 3, you could say jacks or insults here. He says, my girl doesn't have pretty eyes. She doesn't have beautiful lips. And her skin is brown. It's not, of course, notice the irony. Today, of course, girls love to sit and get lots of dark skin color, right? They'll suntan or even use tanning beds sometimes, because in our culture, having darker skin is beautiful, right? Okay, go figure. Notice the next one, line 4. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. Whoa. So what's he jacking on now? Let's write it down. He's jacking on her hair, right? Again, I'm on page 278. Right, out of your hymnal, Sonnet 130. He says, hey, you know what? My girl doesn't have pretty eyes. My girl doesn't have pretty lips. My girl doesn't have pretty skin. My girl doesn't have pretty hair. She's got a few wires growing out of her head. Whoa! And already we're asking this question, is this a poem of compliment or is this a poem of insult? What did this girl, in other words, maybe the question we start asking is, well, dude, what did this girl do to Shakespeare that would make him want to write a poem about his girl in this way? We go back to the comments we were making just a few seconds ago. We don't know who this woman is that he's referencing. Okay, we don't know who she is, what she looks like. Look at the next one. I have line 5. I have seen roses damask, that is to say variegated, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. In other words, she doesn't have pretty color in her cheeks. Whoa! So he's continuing to comment about her plainness. Maybe we would say even her ugliness. Read the next one. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. Now, your footnote tells you that the word reeks here actually means just to emanate. But of course, we're familiar with the word reek. If somebody says about your breath that it reeks, are they complimenting you or insulting you? It's kind of like a no-duck question. So notice it. Go back over it again at level 1. I hope you've got it written down. He jacks on her eyes, says they're nothing like the sun. He jacks on her lips. He said they're not pretty. He jacks on her skin color. He says that's not nice. It's not beautiful. He jacks on her hair as being like wires coming out of her head. He jacks on her cheeks as not having pretty color in her cheeks. And now he says that her breath reeks. Whoa. Again, compliment or insult to this point in the poem. Oh, look at the next one. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. Whoa, she doesn't have a very nice voice. When she talks, she does not have a very nice voice at all. Whoa, look at the next one. I grant, I never saw a goddess go, that is to say walk. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. In other words, when she walks, she's kind of clumsy. She doesn't have a graceful walk. She has kind of a clumsy walk. Whoa. So when you put all this together, the first 12 lines of this poem, how do you summarize it at level 1? My girl, can you put it in one line? Would you say my girl is ugly? Or would you say my girl is normal? Most readers today read this poem and say, my girl is ugly. That is to say, my mistress, my girl, and of course the word mistress here then starts to become kind of interestingly problematic. Is this a girl he once was in love with and now he's not in love with her? Or, hello, she doesn't return his text anymore. And so he's basically writing a jack sonnet where he basically is trying to jack or dishonor. And he basically says about her, she's ugly, she's butt ugly, she's nowhere near the kinds of women that I would like to be in love with. Again, Shakespeare's genius. He leads you to believe this is an insult poem, first 12 lines. A way to ask this is, if you were the girl he was supposedly in love with, his mistress, and you read the first 12 lines, would you be sitting up going, oh, that is so sweet? Like, for example, in earlier sonnets that we've looked at. Or would you rather be reading each line going, what? My breath reeks? I need a tic-tac? What are you talking about? Yeah, that's a whole lot more the way you would probably read this poem. And yet, now look at the genius of Shakespeare and how he spins it around in the final rhymed couplet. By the way, just to point out, at 2B, this is a sonnet of 14 lines. It does have a rhyme scheme. Do you see it? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G, right? And definitely has the iambic pentameter, right? That ba-bum, 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 right? Notice any line, if snow be white, why then her breasts are done. If snow be white, why then her breasts are done. Ba-bum, 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 right? In other words, we definitely got a Shakespearean sonnet here, which means that, remember, 4 lines, an octave, 4 lines, that gets us our 12 lines. That's where we are, line 12. Now we're ready for lines 13 and 14. And yet, notice how the poem ends with some irony, And yet, by heaven, I think my love is rare as any she belied with faults compare. Whoa. Now, before I even talk about it, I am going to challenge you to look at those 2 lines on your own really quickly, and at level 1, put them in your own words. Clearly, we've outlined the first 12 lines of this poem as, my girl is really not that hot. My girl is actually kind of plain and ugly. And yet, let's look at it again. By heaven, I think my love as rare, as any she belied with faults compare. Now you can see your footnote for belied means misrepresented. All right? As any she belied with faults compare. What has he said? The fact that he uses the word yet is going to be a giveaway that he has set us up. My girl is not very pretty. My girl is actually kind of plain. Let's just say it out loud. My girl's basically ugly. And yet, that tells you, the minute the word yet gets used, that tells you, he's saying or implying now the opposite of what he just said. And yet, he says, I think my love, by the way, the word love here is probably the same word mistress. That is to say, my girl, the one I love, all right? But it can also mean my affection towards her, meaning love. as rare as any she belied with false compare. Now, how is this poem usually understood? Let's go ahead and outline now in terms of level 2A. Let's go to some messages themes. One observation has been made here, that the way to read this poem is to say, my girl, I'm not going to talk about her as extraordinary. I'm not going to talk about her as beyond all of the other women in terms of beauty. But what I'm going to say about her is this. Two things. She's my girl, and she's good enough for me. She's my girl, and she's good enough for me. No, she doesn't have the most amazing eyes. No, she doesn't have the most amazing skin. No, she doesn't have the most amazing breath or the most amazing walk. And yet, for me, I think of her as remarkable, rare. That is to say, she's perfect for me. She may not be perfect for you, because she may not be a Victoria's Secret model, but you know what? I don't want a Victoria's Secret model. I want her. She's normal, but that's what I like. Now that is an interesting idea. So let's play around with it for a moment as we think at 2A about possible messages from this poem. One possible message from this poem is, you know, there's two kinds of reasons to go after somebody. One is they are stunningly beautiful. In other words, you look at them and you just kind of go, I've never seen anything that beautiful in my life. I'm going for that. The other argument says, you know, I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is I'm interested in someone I can relate to. Someone that's, for me, the ideal match. And that doesn't mean that someone has to be stunningly beautiful. In fact, it may actually be a relief, right? I've had senior guys who will say, I would much rather be with a girl when I go to the mall and walk in the mall. I don't have every single guy in the mall looking at this girl like, oh man, I wish I had that. I kind of like a girl who's just normal. She doesn't have to stick out. She doesn't have to make herself stunningly beautiful. She is what she is, and that's good enough for me. One possible meaning of this poem, right? Now, there is a second reading of this poem, and it's a little more dark, it's a little more skeptical, and some of you maybe will buy in more to this one, and that is, dude, you cannot insult a woman for 12 lines and then turn around and say, just kidding, just kidding. It doesn't work out that way. The minute you go, your breath reeks, pretty much you've already told this woman, I got no more interest in you, okay? In other words, there is a second reading of this poem that says it's all ironic. He's going to try and spin it at the end, but it does not work. This is a Nasty Jack poem that says, you know what, you're really not that attractive, but I'll take you anyway. Which is code language for, you're really not that attractive, and I don't know that I really want to be with you. But I guess if I have to, I will. So it's an interesting poem in that regard. It leads readers to wonder, which side of that coin do you read this poem on? Do you see it as the Jack poem of all time? Or do you rather see it as an amazing statement of, you know what, I don't need my girl to be stunningly beautiful. I just need her to be mine. And because she's mine, she's rare. In other words, I found a girl with whom I'm compatible with. Now that is an interesting question, let's ask it. And of course immediately, some of you already at 3A are writing down that question of the wife of Bath's tale. Remember the story. The knight is given the opportunity to choose. You can either have the Victoria's Secret model, stunningly physically beautiful, but you're always going to have to worry and be jealous. Or you can have her as normal, average, can we say it, even plain. But she will be the most amazing friend and companion. You'll never have to doubt her. You can always trust her. This is the question as well of Sonnet 130. So let's ask it right now as a possible message theme. Which is better? We'll obviously answer this at 3B, our own personal response later. But let's write it down now at 2A. Which is better? To find someone you're into, someone you totally are into, that you're compatible with, even though they're not physically stunning? Or is it better to go after someone that is a trophy, that is physically extraordinary, and then decide, and even if you're not totally compatible with them, as one senior guy said recently, well, no, I really don't like her personality, but she's hot. That is to say, when I go in public with her, other guys go, dude, you are the luckiest guy imaginable. And he goes, yes, I am. Even though, really, it's not like he totally trusts her, and he's not really that compatible with her, but when he steps out, every guy wants to be him, and therefore, fine, that's the woman I want. Question, which is better? And which do guys most generally go for? Do they go for the girl that's the most stunningly beautiful, or do they rather go for the girl that will be the great companion, with whom they're compatible, with whom they can get along with? In other words, let's say it now at 2A, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Right? In other words, let's go ahead and write it down. Right, let's write it down. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Of course, that phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, starts to make sense, and now I can wait for a couple of you to go, look at the first line again. If you like the line, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and then you pick up Sonnet 130, what's the first line? My mistress, right? My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. That is to say, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Let's jump to 2B really quickly. Clearly this is a sonnet. We've already identified that, so write that down. This is a Shakespearean sonnet. No question, we obviously have those three elements of the Shakespearean sonnet. You've already written it down, the 14 lines, the iambic pentameter, and obviously the rhyme scheme for a Shakespearean sonnet of A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. No question. But let's also at 2B make a quick observation, rhetoric, not what Shakespeare says, but how he says it, by pointing out the way in which he engages in a bit of irony here. Irony. Say one thing, mean something else, right? That is to say, there may be a sense of a bit of hyperbole, exaggeration. You get to decide whether this is sarcasm or not when he says his girl's breath reeks. Is that sarcasm? Or is that rather just trying to play down, ironically, on this notion that the only good girl is the Victoria's Secret model, stunningly good-looking girl, right? Of course, the reality is